question you'd like to ask about it, please call in at 232-4434. We'd like to hear your input or any questions you might have. Also, we want to remind everybody, anything that we talk about on the show tonight, you can find links to the different places where you can view the different things that we talk about through our website at realitycheck.homepad.com. There's links to Mr. Pye's website as well as to the Starchild Skull website, and there's also a survey on our website that we'll talk about a little later that you can vote what you think the Starchild Skull actually is. So again, we do have Lloyd Pye here with us tonight, and he is going to be discussing the skull, and he actually has the skull with him tonight, so you'll be able to see it a lot better than on the website. And give us your opinion. Give us a call, 232-4434. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back in just a few minutes, and we'll talk about the skull. Stay tuned. Thanks. Hi, welcome back to Reality Check. Joining us tonight is Lloyd Pye, who is the author of the book Everything You Know Is Wrong. He's been on our show a few times in the past. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Melanie. I'm glad to be here.
Tonight he's joining us to discuss the Starchild skull, which is what has come to be known as, which is an unusual skull that was found near Chihuahua, Mexico, many years ago. I'll let you go ahead and tell the story. I'm not even going to attempt it.
Well, the Starchild was found about 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua, Mexico, 60 to 70 years ago. It was found by a young woman at the time. She, in later life, could not remember how old she was. She believed she was in her late teens, 15, 16, 17, somewhere in there. And though she was an American citizen, her parents were Mexicans. And so they took her at that point back to visit her relatives in the old homestead, which was a small rural village 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua. So when they took her there, when she arrived, she was told immediately, we do not go in the caves, we do not go in the mine tunnels around here, that is taboo, do not do it. Well, you know, everyone knows the rule. You tell a teenager what not to do, and that's immediately what they're going to do as soon as they can. So as soon as she had the opportunity, she snuck away and began to explore those mines and tunnels, or mine tunnels and caves. So in one of the mine tunnels, she was very specific about that, at the back of it, a long straight tunnel dug into a mountain, at the back of it, she found a human skeleton lying on its back. And that was unusual enough, but then she noticed beside it what she called a misshapen hand sticking up out of the dirt right beside where the human one was laying on the dirt. And so that hand was wrapped around the upper arm like this, the upper arm of the skeleton laying on its back on the dirt. So that set her back for a moment, but she gathered her courage and she scraped the dirt off that arm to see what was underneath, and she found a shallow grave with what she called a misshapen body that was much smaller than the body that was lying on the dirt, and it had a misshapen head. So we have a misshapen hand, misshapen body, very misshapen head. She thought it was so unusual, she took all of the bones, and she had a large basket with her. Apparently she had told the people there that she was going to pick fruit or berries or something, so she had a basket with her, and she put all the bones in the basket and took them back to the home, or near it but not in it, because she didn't know how to broach it to the adults what she had done, but she felt compelled to hold on to them. So she hid them behind a tree, a large tree, and a couple days later a torrential rain came and washed all the bones away, completely away, in a massive downpour. And a couple days after that, when she could get back to the area, she found nothing. Everything was gone. So she walked a little down where the water would have carried them, and she found the two skulls. So she kept those, she snuck them into her baggage, well, the two skulls minus the lower jaws, minus the mandibles. Your mandibles are not hooked on. So she smuggled those back into the States, didn't tell anybody, kept them her whole life, basically in a cardboard box in a garage. As she entered old age and near death, she had made friends with an American man. She asked him if he would take them over, and he said yes, he would, so she willed them to him, and he took them when she died. He kept them for 5 years in the same box in his garage, basically, and his wife did not like them on the premises, and so she gave them to he gave them, she forced him to give them to another couple who were UFO knowledgeable. And because of my work in human origins and my study and comparisons in my work of human and ancient human body bones, skulls, body parts, and feet, people were aware of who I was, and so they contacted me and they asked me to be the caretaker of the skull to have it scientifically examined, and that's what I've been doing for the past 5 months. I've had it now in my basic possession for 5 months, and we've been trying to do what needs to be done to get the testing done. So we're now at the point of about ready to get the DNA, which is the critical thing, done. That's a very expensive process. That's taken us a long time to get that arranged, but we're at the point of doing that. We're also at the point of doing the carbon-14. We've got that underway, actually. We've going to have to do the endocranial cast, which is to see what the brain looked like, take a cast of the inside of the head. We're going to have to do neutron spectroscopy, which will give us the bone chemistry, what the bone was actually made of. And we'll also be doing a forensic sculpture, which will give us what we hope will be a look at what the face might have been like based on the structure of the head. We'll have to use, of course, human parameters to do that, but we think we'll get an interesting look because the skull itself is so unusual.
Right. You said right now you're at the point of doing the DNA testing.
Right.
That's something that we've mentioned before. I just wanted to briefly let people know again. There are two types of DNA testing that you're doing on the skull. The first is going to be the mitochondrial DNA testing, which will only show the mother's side, correct? So that if it is actually, say, an alien-human hybrid and the mother was human, it'll come up human.
Right. Well, what we had originally thought, based on the costs of these tests, mitochondrial DNA is a lot less expensive to recover than is ancient nuclear DNA. So we were under the impression that we were going to have to do mitochondrial first, and then, based on the results of that, perhaps do the nuclear DNA, but we have found a lab that has the capacity and is willing to try to do both at the same time. So we're looking at about a 2-month process, start to finish. We think now that we're going to have the definitive answer in October. And what's exciting about this, and what makes this relic different than any other or any piece of evidence to ever come out of the fringe, is that it's not a film, it's not a photograph, it's not someone's personal testimony, that the other side can just say, well, you're stupid, you don't know what you're talking about, and you're wrong, and that's that. This is going to be definitive, and they can't argue with the DNA. I mean, they may argue after the first round of tests. We may have to do another round, something where their people are monitoring, but really basically DNA says what it says, and you can disavow it if you like, but you can't really say that it doesn't say what it says. So, it could go the other way. It could turn out that this is just an extremely malformed human being. That's not impossible, but it has such a wide array of differences from the norm, and it looks so much like what, for lack of a better term, is called a gray, that we are obligated, I certainly feel obligated, and those of us that know anything about this feel obligated, to run this thing out as far as it takes, because it truly does look, I think, like all the legends and stories we hear of alien-human hybrids. This is the closest any of us have ever seen to anything really like that.
Right. It's known now as a Starchild skull, and that came about because, of course, the Starchild legends that were in Mexico.
Maybe we should talk about that. The Starchild legends, the reason we call it the Starchild skull is that there are the star being legends, and this is really surprising to me because I did not know this before the Starchild came into my possession. We're told that, and in fact it turns out that there are legends that extend back for hundreds of years throughout South America and in all likelihood around the world.
Oh yeah, definitely. Worldwide.
In which small rural villages would be picked out by beings from off-world, alien beings that would come down, mostly gray types, that would pick a woman out of those villages who would be barren, generally not have children, and she would be made pregnant with an alien human hybrid. She would give birth to it and be allowed to keep it for 5, 6, 7 years, and then they would come back and get it. The reason being that the Greys, the aliens, don't have the capacity, don't have emotional capacity the way we do, and would not have the ability to nurture an infant. And an infant has to be nurtured, at least a human infant has to be nurtured, to the age of 6 or so, or it's not emotionally or mentally stable. We know that from today. If you're not nurtured well until the age of 6, nothing can repair that damage. You're always going to be messed up. And if you are well nurtured to the age of 6, you can withstand almost anything as an adult, including a stint in concentration camps. So apparently the aliens figured out what the problem was, and so they allowed the mothers to nurture to the age of mental stability, and then they would come and take them and do whatever it is that they do with them. They do not follow this program anymore, apparently, because the world is so small. You couldn't get away with a child like that in an isolated village anyway. There's nothing but isolated. So now they have the program of what is called harvesting, in which, it's a whole nother thing to talk about, but they do it in a different way now, but they seem to be still producing alien human hybrids for whatever reason, whatever they're using them for.
And that's a whole nother show. We'll get to that on a show. We promise we'll get to that.
That is a whole other topic. But the interesting thing about these skulls is that, like you said, you found the mother skull. What's believed to be the mother skull?
One thing to talk about is why the scenario of what the lady found. Given what you've just heard about the star being legends, and given what the lady says about how she found the two skeletons, what we've concluded, and again this is just supposition, but what we've concluded is that human was a female, and it was the mother of one of these alien human hybrids, and that we think the Starchild was an alien human hybrid, and she was raising it. Because the child died at the age of 5, pushing into the age of 6, which we know because of a piece of maxilla with a couple of baby teeth in it. We've come to the conclusion that she found out, the mother did, that they were coming to get her child. And for reasons we don't understand, we have a suspicion, and I'll explain that when we show the skulls. We have a suspicion that she, for whatever reason, decided not to let her child go with them, and she killed it. Now, whether she killed it outside the mine shaft or inside, we don't know that, but she killed it. She brought it into the mine. She buried it in that shallow grave. She left the hand sticking up, knowing what she was going to do, and she poisoned herself and laid down and wrapped the child's hand around her arm, and she just laid there and died. Now, that's the best scenario we can come up with to fit the evidence of what was found. It almost certainly is a murder-suicide. The child could have died, and from illness or something like that. Coincidentally, that's a possibility as well. But it's unlikely then that she would have killed herself in the process. Probably murder-suicide based on what we have, and probably Starchild because of the star being legends, and it fits the profile: small rural village and strange-looking child.
Right. A lot of people argue that this is simply a malformed human skull, and
that is indeed possible. But the things you have to keep in mind about malformations or deformities are generally when one part of the head goes wrong, another part will be fine. It will look human. If the face goes out, the back of the head will look human. If the back goes out, the front will look human. If the side goes out, the other side. You'll see human traces in every deformity, and you just don't have that here. You have nothing that's human. You have 8 major points of the skull that are completely reconfigured. So that's one thing. And another thing in deformity, you generally have asymmetry. It's lopsided. It doesn't look right. This kid is absolutely symmetrical in every way. It looks designed to be the way it is, even though it doesn't look like anything you've ever seen before.
And I know the mother skull had shown some evidence of the binding, which some of the native cultures used to do to change the shape of the head.
No, actually, that's wrong, Walter. No, it's not. It's not binding. It's cradle boarding.
Cradle boarding. Okay,
now,
the boarding.
Understand the difference, because everybody knows that some societies do, in fact, bind the heads of their children to flatten the foreheads and raise the crowns. But and they also cradle boarding is when they just lay the infants on a board and strap it on their back like a backpack and go about their work with two hands. Well, in cradle boarding, you just get a flattening in the back of the head
Right.
alone. But in in head binding, they bind the whole head and you get a completely reconfigured head. But in the slides that I've seen of bound heads, all of them, in every case that I've seen, and I've seen a bunch of them, they always have a big soft spot, an open spot at the top of their head. If they die at the age of 80, they're going to have a big open spot in their heads because the bones are not allowed to knit
Right.
properly. And that's what allows that shape to take.
Now, what about the hybrid? Does it show?
The hybrid shows perfect knitting. No,
Right.
it was
No.
not, and furthermore, it doesn't look, even though the back of its head is flat, it's not completely flat. So
Right.
when you feel the back of the mother's head, who was cradle boarded, it's very smooth. When you feel the back of the Starchild's head, doesn't seem to, even though it was raised in a cradle boarding culture, it does not seem to have been cradle boarded because its bones are definitely not flat.
Rigid,
they're
bumpy,
convoluted.
like
right.
it should be, right?
So.
Right. I think what we should do here is maybe we'll go ahead and take a short break, and we'll come
Sure.
back and you can
Look at the
then we'll
skulls.
show you the
See the
skulls, so
famous
you can see
skull.
what we're talking about, and then we'll take some phone calls a little later in the show. So please give us a call and let us know what you think. The number to call is 232-4434, and we'll be back in just a moment. Hi, welcome back to Reality Check. Tonight we're talking about the Starchild skull, and joining us is Lloyd Pye, who has been trying to get testing done on the skull, and he has here with him, it's what you believe to be the mother's skull, correct?
Right. We call this Mom. We could be wrong. But, we still don't know yet, but we're near having enough to do everything that we need to do, so we're getting out and beginning to show it to people like we're doing here tonight. What I'm going to do now is give you all a little quick human anatomy lesson so you know what you're supposed to see versus what you're going to see with the Starchild. Now notice if you can, and I'm trying to get the lights such, in a human we have an eye socket that is a cone. If you see, my finger goes in about 2 knuckles worth, about 5 centimeters worth into our heads. And this cone has at the back of it, if you can see that line, those lines back there in that little circle, that's our optic nerve and the optic fissure with the vessels that feed our eyes. So imagine just an ice cream cone kind of thing going into your head, but going in, fairly deep. All right, and the eyeball sits in there and it's strapped by muscles all around so it can move, etc. Now, as you come around to the side, we see our cheekbone. This is the zygomatic arch, and notice, if you will, the depth of the hole that goes underneath there. You get about 2 fingers worth of muscles that come up through here and spread out over the whole side of the head along this line here. Now, if you see the difference in texture, the roughness here versus the smoothness here, this line that I'm following with my finger is where the chewing muscles go, all through here. So the whole side of your head basically is wrapped with chewing muscles that come up through here, and that's to hold your jaw and allow you to eat and all that. Now, the bones are the frontal bone, the sphenoid bone, the temporal bone, the 2 parietals, and the occipital back here we'll talk about in a minute. Now, this is your ear hole right here. As you see, your ear would sit right there. See how that goes? Ear hole right here, just to get you oriented on how it works. Now, again, I said that the mother, we think, killed the child. Really a strange act. If you look right here, you can see she had a severe concussion at some point. If she had this from the time she had the child within the 5 years that it was alive, perhaps this is enough of an injury to have made her crazy enough to kill her child and kill herself. That's the best thing we can come up with. Now notice that the back of the head is very smooth. This is a cradle board. You see the line? This should be round, and us it would all be round, but it's flattened off because she was cradle boarded. Very common in rural villages all over the world, actually. Now see the knot right here? This is where it stops. This is the knot at the back of everyone's head. You can feel your own. That's called the inion. It's right in the center of the back of your head. It's where your neck, two big neck muscles come up and hook. You know, so you can see them right here on this person. The two big neck muscles come in and hook right there. But the neck itself goes from the back of the mastoid bones right here behind the ears all the way up through the inion area and over through here. So this whole area that you see right here where my hand is covering is neck. And the neck is that way to protect the foramen hole. This is the hole where your spine goes into your head, the foramen hole, foramen magnum. Now notice, if you will, it's a little back of center. Center is more like right here on a human skull. Well, the foramen is back here. And the reason for that is this is all bone and brain back here. The front of the head, the front of a person's head, that you see here is basically hollow. You have sinuses all through here, frontal sinuses. You have the eye sockets in here, frontal sinuses here, eye sockets here, nose, mouth. So the weight of the skull is to the rear. So you need the balance point back here. It's different in the Starchild, as we'll see. Now this is a small human head. This was a small person, we think maybe 5 feet tall. And it weighs about 1 pound, 13 ounces. Got some weight to it, but not as much as average. The average human skull weighs 2.2 pounds. Mine would, everyone in this room would, and probably yours. But this is a small person, and understand the weight ratio, 1 pound, 13 ounces. Now with all that said, oh, and one other thing I want to point out, I'm sorry. See here with the zygomatic arch gone, see this bone right in here, right here, pressing up against the maxilla. The upper jaw is called the maxilla, all this, and this is the buttress bone for the maxilla that holds it in place. You're going to see this on the Starchild, but you will not see, whoops, I'm going backwards, you will not see the maxilla right here, all right, because that's missing on the Starchild. With all that said,
Drum roll, please.
drum roll please.
There you go.
Okay. This is the Starchild. Now, as you can see, it bears no resemblance at all to the human skull, except the fact that it's bone. It's approximately the same size. Now notice the difference in color. I think you can see it on your screen. Remember, this one laid on the surface. The back of its head is stained somewhat, you see? But the Starchild was buried, and so it is stained throughout, and it has a real serious stain here on this side and into this eye socket. Whatever was in the ground that it was buried in stained it. But as you can see, its eye sockets are absolutely not human. You see the shallowness of them. They're only about 2 centimeters. Remember, my finger went in two joints before? It goes in 1 joint here. Not even 1 joint, really. So it's very, very much more shallow. It's not a cone at all. It's a scoop. And if you notice, if you can get a closer shot on it, notice now that the optic nerves and the optic fissures are down at the bottom, base, way, way down, completely shifted. Now, what's interesting about this is it's incredibly symmetrical. If you take your finger, as I'm doing right now, and you put it here in the upper outside, you feel a little dent clearly in the bone. You can't see it to look at it, but it is there. You drag your finger this way, you feel a rise in the bone, and it sinks into another dent right here. So you go dent, rise, dent, that you can't even see. The other side, exactly the same. Now that kind of symmetry, that kind of fine, detailed symmetry, does not speak to this being deformity. It just virtually cannot be. These eyes were designed to look that way by, I think, the genes that created them. Now, if you notice, as we move around to the side of it, its zygomatic arch is gone, but the stump of it is here, its cheekbone, but it's much smaller, much smaller, and much more reduced and angled down if you look relative to where it would hook right here. Now, instead of 2 fingers, if you remember 2 fingers sliding up under this, you would be lucky to get a couple of good spaghetti noodles through this little trough right here. And instead of covering the whole side of the head with chewing muscles like ours do, maybe you can see the area is right through here. It's maybe 1/3 of ours, the chewing muscle area for this, meaning that its jaw is going to be much smaller and much lighter than ours. which of course is very much like the depictions that we have of grays, which we think this probably will be related to in some way. Now, if you notice, I mentioned the buttress bone a minute ago, and here it is right here, so that the maxilla, the teeth, would be sticking off here if they were there. But we have the same bones, the frontal, sphenoid, the temporal, the parietals, and the occipital back here. Now notice the size of the parietals. Notice the extreme explosion of size in the parietals. Now these lines that you see here are the cranial sutures. If you look, you can see the same thing exactly on the human. They are the same. These are, of course, better put together because this is a person who was 25 to 30 years old at death, we estimate, and this is something that was approximately 5 years old. And we make that estimation because the sutures are all well closed, which puts it over the age of 3, and we do have a piece of maxilla that has 2 baby teeth in it, so that puts it a little under the age of 6 as we measure time. So this may not have been how this measured time, but as we measure time, this was approximately 5 years old. Now, if you notice the back of the head as we swing around, here's where we really see some very interesting things, very, very unusual things. The occipital, if you look at the human one, real quick, the occipital, you remember that's a very thick, very dense, very heavy bone protecting the neck, all right? With this, we have a flattening, complete flattening of the bone, and yet it's not cradle boarded. If you look very carefully, let me see if I can get the angle just right. You can see that it's not totally flat.
All right, I'm sitting here.
It's convoluted.
I can see it.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
you can see it. You can feel it very clearly. It's not like Mom. Mom's flat like a pool table. Like a board. This kid was not actually cradle boarded. But if you remember the inion, that knot at the back of the head, where we should have or see an inion here, there's not only not an inion. If you see that darkening, it's a dent. It's an actually convoluted kind of area. It's dented in, concave. Now, instead of having the muscle connections right up here underneath it for the neck, look where they are. They're all the way down here, almost an inch down. And notice they're only about 1 centimeter from the foramen hole. So this neck offers almost no protection to the spine. The neck of this, whatever it was, is only going to be about that big, about perhaps 1/3 the size of our neck. So it's not only a different kind of neck, it has to sit, the head has to sit differently. You remember the balance point for us was to the rear. Notice how this is perfectly dead center? In both directions, it's centered up. This is going to sit on the neck, this head is, like an odd-shaped golf ball on a golf tee. This is not the way the human head sits. So with all of that, we have to say, wait a minute, this looks like grays. This looks like every depiction that anyone here, there you go, look, here we're looking at one right here. It was fortunate that he would wear this because this is fundamentally what we're looking at. Now notice too, if you will, this line right here, see that? The eye socket, if you look at the eye socket here we'll put it right up, you see the eyeball of this is going to have to be down here somewhere with a lot of space up above it. Now as far as these black lenses go, what we've thought of, or at least what an ophthalmologist has told us, is that certain creatures like snakes and camels have a second protective lid over that shields them from whatever. This could be a shielding lid naturally grown over the eye that would of course go away in death, and that would leave an eyeball underneath here similar to what we have. Now,
just to interject, I know a lot of the depictions and a lot of the drawings that supposed visitors to these places have seen have been that the hybrids have a very different shape eye than the classic almond shape. That's true. Kind of a protrudent, almost a bulged out type eye, and I would assume with that shallow eye socket that would meet the criteria right there.
I have in the tours that I've taken in the last 5 months showing this around, I have had more than a dozen women come to me and tell me their own story of seeing their own hybrid children. And they all describe them the same way, as having human-like eyes, not quite human eyes, but very bulgy, larger irises, larger pupils, so that they don't look quite the same, but they are eyes as we know eyes that do move. If you look at it at this, if that is so, those eyes are going to have to sit way down here, and they're going to be a different kind of eye, and it is going to have to bulge because this is so shallow in here. So everything that we're seeing in this skull looks just like the verbal reports that we've been getting from the people who see their children, who say they have these flat heads, who say they have these very thin necks, who say they have these eyes that bulge out of their heads and don't look quite right, and don't look quite right in the nose. Now I have some pictures, and maybe we can, if we're going to do another break, I have some pictures drawn by a woman who saw her own hybrid children on what she says is a spacecraft. Now you can believe it or you cannot believe it, but she said she saw them, and she was an artist, and so she drew them, and she gave me copies of those pictures, and I've of course made slides and incorporate them with the presentation that I give. But I can hold those pictures up after the break if you'd like to.
We'll go ahead and we'll take a short break, and we'll come back in a few minutes and show you those pictures, and we'll also get to some phone calls in just a few minutes. So if you're on the line, or if you have a question, or if you have a comment about the skull, please give us a call at 232-4434, and we'll take some calls a few minutes after we come back. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to Reality Check. Tonight we're talking about the Starchild skull, which is what we've shown you a little while ago. You said you had some pictures of what someone drew for you that is their rendition of an alien, a human hybrid.
This is from a lady named Josie Galanti in Austin, Texas, who claims that she was harvested, that fetuses were harvested from her by aliens. Again, I'm not attesting whether it's true or not. This is what she contends. Right. And what she said is that she was later, a few years later, taken on board a craft and shown her children. And this is what she says her children look like. Let me see if I can get that line. This is the guy that got her, basically, or one of the leaders. And these are smaller shots of her children. Now I'll show you some larger shots so you can see them. This is a 12-year-old daughter that she saw. And she drew this. Now this is in 1996, 3 years ago, so she had no input at all from the skull, and yet this is very much like probably what a head on that skull would look like. This is a 5-year-old son, or 6, she said maybe even 7, she couldn't tell because they're so slight, their heads are so much bigger than their bodies.
There you go, no cheekbones.
And notice, if you will, the profile of the little boy as well. So this is pretty remarkable that she would draw something like this 3 years ago and claim that this was her child when that very much is like what the Starchild looks like. Now just to show you some comparisons real quick, this is the area of musculature on the side, chewing muscle on the side of the human, normal human, and on the Starchild. You see the considerable difference in that. This is the area of the neck muscle attachment, if you can see that. And you see to the left, well, excuse me, this is Starchild here, and this is the human here. You see the extreme difference in the size of the neck muscle attachments. And of course, you see the difference in the balance point of the head. Very different in every case. So while it can't be ruled out that this is indeed a deformed human of some kind, it seems more and more likely as we study that it's going to prove to be an alien or an alien-human hybrid. We're thinking alien-human hybrid. Of course, if it does, then that's a very astounding thing, and we will be extremely fortunate to have it.
Right.
If it's not, if it turns out that we're wrong, we overestimated, what it's going to do is just open up another chapter of some kind in the history of human deformity, and there will be a lot to learn from this.
Right. Either way, it's an astounding discovery.
Either way, it's an interesting discovery, and one way it's astounding. I think if it's just a human deformity of some kind, it will be certainly unique, but it isn't going to be nearly what it would be if we can prove that it's not entirely human. Exactly.
We do want to remind everybody, if you do want to see, if you do have the internet and want to see pictures of this, and there's a full story on the Starchild Project website.
A nice rotating
pictures where you can look at it closely. That's www.starchildproject.com, and also you can get to this through our website as well at realitycheck.homepad.com. So if you'd like to take another look at it for yourself, that's where you can go. And also on the Starchild Project website, if you'd like to do anything to help in the research for this, to try to get the scientific research done that needs to be done, if there's anything that you'd like to do to help, please go to the website, and there's addresses that you'll find there telling you exactly what to do to do your part to contribute.
Though we have a lot of it done, we still need to do a lot more. We're not nearly finished. We're certainly, I would say, way better than halfway done, but we still have a way to go. And without belaboring the point, we have until October to do it, and we've got several things left to do. Those things that I mentioned, the carbon-14, the endocranial cast, the forensic sculpture. Those are all very important things that will need to be done as the DNA is being done, and we're just hoping for the best.
Well, I have to wonder, I know stories you hear over the years, especially if you study this field of unknowns, material comes up missing in labs, people are threatened, don't release this knowledge, or your career is at stake. Has anything come up that far as yet?
We've had a couple of problems, to be honest with you. We've had a couple of things that we've tried to do that have been stopped. But on the other hand, we've had several things that we've done that have not been stopped. So I don't know what to tell you about what's going on relative to behind the scenes. All I can tell you is that it's been 5 months and I'm still sitting here. So I think that says a lot right there. We're going to get an answer. I think the labs that we're talking with now, I've certainly learned one of the mistakes that I was making initially was I was being too open and too upfront with what was going on. I was telling absolutely everything. My policy was going to be perfectly honest, tell everybody everything about what's going on, and in doing that, I goofed up. I gave whoever might want this not to happen,
the chance to mess with it.
The chance to mess with it, exactly. So now I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not saying specifically where anything is being done. I'm just saying it's being done. Take my word for it. We're going to get it done. We're going to get answers. And I think that the people that are doing the work are good, reliable people, and will be able to provide, I think, swift and accurate answers. And if we're not happy with those answers, then we can always do the testing again. We have what we need to do everything that needs to be done in a way that it has never been done before. So we're taking very good care of it as much as we can to see to it that we'll have the opportunity to get those answers. And I urge you all to just keep dropping in on the site periodically, and you'll know what's going on.
And we're going to bug you to death with it too. So keep watching us.
Didn't you mention that you have 4 teeth from the skull?
We have in the piece of maxilla. The front piece, what it looks like, if you can look here, the piece of maxilla that we have, let me see if I can set it up. Okay, it's from the middle right here to the right over to here, and then it comes up here and it breaks off. So we have a little piece of nostril right here. We have here, instead of these 3 teeth, we have 3 holes, but right here we have 2 baby teeth. Up in the bone, we have 2 compacted molars. So we have 4 teeth total. That gives us 4 chances at the DNA, because that's where you get the DNA from, is the pulp in the teeth. You couldn't get DNA out of just the dry bone.
So you can only use 1 tooth once, basically.
1 tooth once, exactly. So we
after
have 4 shots. Exactly.
There you go.
So we're going to take pretty good care that we use each one wisely, and we feel like we'll get an answer within 1 or 2 shots. We're hoping that we'll be able to do that. It's a very delicate thing to do. This is kind of like a chess game in a way. You got to plot your moves very carefully, and then you have to not let what you're doing outstrip your ability to pay for it. And that's been a problem all along. But we're chipping away at it. We're getting it done. And one way to look at it is that 5 months is a long time, or 8 months, or 9 months, whatever it's going to be. On the other hand, there's a story out on the internet right now of a group in Australia that had a hair from what is said to be an alien female, a long blonde hair. And after 4 years, they've just gotten the mitochondrial DNA done, and they are looking for the money to do the nuclear DNA. So in that sense, we're going ahead very fast. So it's all relative.
Okay.
Well, we had a couple of call-in questions. We're not able to get them on the air right now, but I know you kind of glanced by where it was actually found. the
Oh,
skulls?
we do not know exactly. All we know, when the woman told the story that I told you earlier, she didn't know that 6 or 7 years after her death, a guy was going to be wanting to know exactly where it was. She
Right.
just said 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua when she was telling the
Right.
man, and that was it. So if you go look at that on a map,
Give you a rough area.
it
anyway.
gets a pretty big area to cover.
Now, how about
exactly.
any brain matter? Was
Oh,
there
I'm
brain
sorry,
matter
I should have
found?
said that. No, no brain matter was found, but this is very important. In the comparison of the weights, if you remember, this weighs 1 pound, 13 ounces, this weighs 13 ounces. In the brain capacity of this, these are approximately the same size, 15 centimeters by 15 centimeters by 15 centimeters. They're approximately the same size. But this is 1,200 cubic centimeters of brain, 1,200 cubic centimeters of brain. We have, normally, as human beings, you have 1,400 cubic centimeters of brain because our heads, our skulls would be bigger than this. But this contains 1,200 cubic centimeters of brain. This has 1,600 cubic centimeters of brain at 5 years old. So if it grew, it would be 2,000, 2,200. What's important about that is a jump of only 200 cubic centimeters, and this is a jump of 400 between these two and 200 from normal. A jump of 200 cubic centimeters is generally a new species. You go from Homo habilis to Homo erectus, that's 200 cubic centimeter jump in brain. From Homo erectus to Homo archaic, 200 cubic centimeters. Archaic to Neanderthal, 200 cubic centimeters. So you're looking at a new species here, if nothing else.
Wow, that's
So,
amazing.
you know, it is amazing. Now,
Also, in your presentation, you mentioned the possibility of a three-lobed brain.
oh yeah, well that's important, and I'm glad you said that, because if you look here, you see the shape of this head is sort of like in 3 parts, rather than the 2-part
Right.
of a human. We know that we have 2 parts in there, left and right hemisphere. Now, it's possible that there's left and right hemisphere in here too. I'm not saying that it's not, but I'm also saying that with the shape of these being roughly equal, the frontal lobe and the 2 parietals, you see, it could
Right.
be that
Possibly.
it's divided into 3. So what we'll do is get an endocranial cast. Now, in here, if you reach your finger in here, which none of you can do, but when you reach inside, you can do it. Now tell me what you feel. Stick your
right,
finger
let
and
me
swipe
see.
it around at the bottom and tell me what you feel.
Yeah, there's a middle ridge
Bunch
that kind
of
of
ridges,
runs up,
right?
and then there's some off to the side.
Right, okay, bunch of ridges. Now, stick your finger in here and tell me what you feel.
Wow, there's a smaller
Very-
ridge, very
So it's-
unpronounced.
So it's possible that there is no cerebellum in this head.
Wow.
Now, if there's no cerebellum in this head, that is not compatible with life as we know it. So we need to do an endocranial cast to really see what this brain was
Right
all
there,
about.
just the cast itself would just apparently open up a whole world with what it would find. So.
Right. Well, it's one of the many tests that we need to do. So we're going out and spreading the word as much as we can, letting people see it, letting people be aware of what we're trying to do, trying to get the help that we need to do what has to be done. But I'm very excited. I got to tell you, I'm very excited. I think we have real potential here. We may be wrong, but I think again this is one of the best chances that our side has ever had to really stick something on the wall. We throw and we
Right.
throw and we
Right.
throw, and it all bounces off. I think this one might stick.
Maybe at the very least, it'll help open up some of the more rigid scientific minds out there that these things are possible.
Right.
I mean,
Well, also too, for those of you that wander the internet, there are some incredibly odd other skulls out
Oh,
there.
yeah.
The M skull and the J
Right.
skull, if you've seen those from Peru. The difference is they have sort of human-like faces under there. This is not, we don't think, a very human-like face. Of course, most of the face is gone, so we can't really know for sure. But it just has so many unique features that are not human. And just to go over them briefly again, you have the eyes that are completely different. We have a zygomatic arch. We have the chewing muscle area that's different. We have the parietals that are different. We have the occipital bone that's different. We have the inion that's different. We have the neck attachments that are different. We have the foramen that's different. We have the positioning that's different. It's just different. It's
Yeah,
just-
everything is different.
and normally, too, understand that when you have a deformity, especially in a primitive society where this was born into. Generally, when something was born that was a freak, it was put to death.
Right.
It was they just didn't bother with it. They would just try again, and they didn't bother with it. There was no stigma at all to infanticide in those kinds of cultures. Still or not to this day.
I'm about to
in
say
many
it
of
still
them.
goes
So,
on in many, many
but
cultures.
even so, if you're born with one defect, you have a chance. You're born with 2 defects, you're in trouble. You're born with 3, you're generally dead. Something's really wrong if in your head. You're looking at 8 major reconfigurations here. This child should have been incompatible with life, and yet here he sits at 5 years
Right.
old doing very well.
At
His
least to
sutures,
5, right.
sutures very solid. You can see he's growing, very well. Everything about him looks healthy and good. So it's just an incredible leap to think that something this deformed, if it's a deformity, could have survived, and yet here it sits. So I'm inclined to believe that it was genetically designed to look the way it looks, and it looks just like it was supposed to.
Right. We're running out of time here, but we do appreciate you being here tonight. It's
Very
been
much
very
so.
interesting. I'm glad you could come and show us the skulls, and we wish you luck with the testing for
Thank you
sure.
very
and,
much.
We'll keep everyone updated on what's happening with the
Okay.
skulls in the future on the show. If you want to find out more about it, go to www.starchildproject.com, where you can also find out what you can do to contribute to the scientific testing as well. So that's on that website. And also, you can go to our website, realitycheck.homepad.com, to find out anything about tonight's show or past or future shows that we've done or will be doing. And if you have a question or a comment for us, please, we always welcome your input. realitycheck101@hotmail.com is our email address.
Homepad.
And
Thank you.
no, they have
Homepad.
no, they have it wrong on the screen actually.
Oh, is that right?
It's realitycheck101@hotmail.com. Trust me. Or you can get to it through the website. But thank you so much for being here
Okay,
tonight.
thank you.
Please do your part. See what you can do. Go to the Starchild Project website and see what you can do. We'll see you next week, and we will keep you updated.
And find Mr. Pye's book and read it. Excellent
His book, Everything You Know Is
Excellent.
Wrong. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Good night.